This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, an open source non-ICO crypto project powered by community. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. That's TUSC.network. The Rob McNeely program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Hey folks, Rob McNeely here, and today we're talking to Brad Michelson. He is a crypto marketing guru based in New York, and today we're going to learn all about the ins and outs of marketing in the crypto space. And I think you see this a lot with a lot of developer-led projects out there, that marketing seems to be the thing that developers hate a lot. But I want to get Brad's kind of input and his take on things. So Brad, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk with us. Marketing is something that it's near and dear to my heart. And I think that, and really for there to be crypto mass adoption, I think marketing, at least from the crypto side of things, really needs to ramp up its game. And I want to kind of explore that a little bit with you today, if possible. But before we dive into kind of all this, marketing stuff, let's talk a little bit about you. What's your background and how did you get into crypto marketing?
So I originally started out in e-commerce marketing. So I was at an agency for a few years and learned the ins and outs of paid media over there. Ended up leaving as the director of strategy at the agency, went in-house to an e-commerce brand and didn't have the best time. And then when I was looking for a job from there, I found my first crypto company. So I jumped into that 2 feet forward, which was pretty fun. I helped launch a DEX, which was really cool and obviously a big learning experience. It was after, the ICO boom to a degree. Like the place I had worked had already completed their ICO, so it was fully funded and they were building out the platform. And it was also right around the time when Facebook and all the social platforms started banning crypto ads. So that's one of the biggest differentiators between traditional marketing and crypto marketing, is that you don't have a lot of the same levers as you might elsewhere.
So what do you do about that? To say you're a crypto project, how do you get your brand out there? How do you market a crypto project effectively?
A lot of it relies on social media, and it's really community building, and not in the way that ICO projects would create a Telegram group and just like get as many people in there as possible and use it as like a pumping mechanism. It's not really like that at all, at least anymore. It's a lot more reliant on word of mouth and just general community sentiment, being able to go on Twitter, having your brand post something. You're not necessarily being like outrageous, but you can just post an innocuous, bullish tweet and you'll get hundreds of likes out of it just because of the goodwill that you've grown in the community. So a lot of it is just sharing and echoing the sentiment of your target audience. But on top of that, you still have to make gestures that endear the brand to the community. So with some people, it's being, a really approachable brand with very easy to understand messaging that maybe is like a really easy onboard into the ecosystem. For example, Lolly, they do a fantastic job with that. Other times it's, something like what we do at eToro, where we'll work with, a famous celebrity or something like that, and we'll do a commercial with them. And that way we're, bringing in more average consumers into the ecosystem. But I think every brand has their own different approach, and it's sort of, the key really is just finding what makes the most sense for the people that want to use your product and expanding that as much as you can.
So I was around when the ICO craze was going nuts. We started 2.5 years ago with Tusk. And it was interesting because we could never even get an ad, placed with any of the social media platforms out there, primarily, Facebook and stuff. But that seems to still be kind of the problem. And in the last 2.5 years, I mean, the ICO world is largely dead, at least in the United States right now. The scam pump and dump groups are mostly, quiet, at least right now, though they'll probably return when, the next bull run kind of jumps up. So the question I would have with you is, why is there such still a blanket, community standards problem with crypto related stuff on the major platforms? Why are they still banning it? The space is so much different and more mature now than it was 2.5 years ago. Do you got any insight on why that might be?
I think it's a risk thing. I think that there were a bunch of lawsuits around the time of the ICO boom, both to the ad platforms and not necessarily just Facebook and Twitter, but predominantly them, as well as other platforms where people are saying, I saw this advertisement on your platform, I assumed it was legit, and it turns out it was a huge scam. I think that everyone by now has noticed the increase in attention on not just content across these social platforms, but whether they're offensive or whatever else, or they're predatory. There's rules on tons and tons of different industries. And obviously finance is a big part of that. And that extends into things like predatory loans, and payday lenders can't necessarily advertise on Facebook, or I think even Google, you can't advertise those products anymore. So unfortunately, crypto is still in one of those categories, but we have seen a little bit of movement that hopefully over the next little while, this will start loosening up a bit. There have been rumors for the last little while.
Yeah, it was interesting. I saw today on my social media that there was a couple social media content people that said they got locked out of their Twitter accounts, which I thought that was interesting. And most of the stuff they post is not what I would call spammy or shilling by any stretch of the imagination, more educational than anything. And it seems like it's pretty alive and well. And I've seen this where a URL will, be banned from, Facebook or Instagram, and there's like zero, you can't even appeal. There's not even a process. There's not a button to push. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of rumors out there, especially among the conspiracy theorists, that, they're trying to, head off any competition, at least on the Facebook side, with like a Libra out there, for instance. So they don't like the competition from other crypto projects. I mean, do you think there's any merit to something like that? It seems a little out there for me, but I was just wondering if you've heard anything along those lines.
I really doubt it. Libra, especially at that time, was so far away from even launching, and it's even far away now from launching, and it's just not really also what that business model is competing with. So I just don't think that they're related personally.
So over the last couple of years, it's been interesting, watching crypto marketing from the inside as a project. There's so many stories that I've heard about, at least in experience myself, where during the ICO boom, just to get an interview on a podcast like this might cost $10,000 or more, depending on what it is. Is that changing now? Is that getting easier?
Way easier. I don't think I've seen a podcast that charges to interview in a while now, which is a really good change. That it was extremely hard to get on, any of those big YouTube channels or whatever it was in 2017, and then it moved into podcasts a couple years later. Obviously, the space for sponsoring all these shows has expanded significantly. There's a ton of money that goes into that, and I've been sponsoring podcasts and influencers for a few years now, and I just think it's going more legit. There was a time where it was like Wild West amateurism, and it's finally matured into a legit marketing marketplace kind of for sponsorships.
It was really kind of funny because when we started originally, I couldn't get on an interview because we didn't do an ICO. We had no cash to spend, lots of money to get on. Actually, it's kind of funny because one of the reasons I started this podcast, because I said, I'm not going to charge, and I never have. I've never even taken a sponsor. I don't do this to monetize. I do this because I genuinely like the industry, and I like to talk to cool and smart people that are doing cool things, because I learn from people like you. coming on the show. So I always thought it was funny because this whole podcast was a response to that originally.
Nice.
When I started this, I didn't really want to do this, but I do like talking to really cool people. And so it's just interesting, kind of seeing it. But when I'm trying to get interviewed, I'm seeing it's a lot different now than it was 2.5 years ago. And I think that's a good thing for the industry, that the advertising and the marketing piece is starting to become more formal, I guess, and a little more legitimate and honest. And I think that's good.
I think there's a reason for that too. I think that with a lot of crypto companies, like when I started at my first crypto company, most of the opportunities that were available were companies, ICO companies that were going to pay you in their tokens. And this was before the ICOs. So they were like pre-mining tokens to give their employees, and in the hopes that the token will pump at the ICO and you'll get paid off by that, but they weren't going to pay you otherwise. Now you're going to be really hard pressed to find that. That's not really good. You're not going to really find that anywhere. A lot of crypto companies now are at least reasonably well funded. So they can pay you normal salaries, some more than others. These things come with benefits and there's HR along with it. And these are real companies as opposed to in that 2017, 2018 range where it was very bootstrapped and like a semi-real company, and people were really leaning into the whole decentralized company thing, which I don't know necessarily if it materialized in the way that they originally presented it, but the way that it's become now is its own unique thing, which is really exciting. But it's nice to see that it's formalized in that way. And with those budgets for the businesses come budgets to hire legit professionals. So, most of the people at most of the projects you're aware of, the big ones at least, they didn't come from crypto. A lot of those people aren't crypto native. Even my team, there's half of us probably aren't crypto people. I'm lucky enough to have been in since 2012 is when I discovered it. So there's, this whole back catalog of knowledge that I can pass down to my team and to other teams. But it's a double-edged sword, right? Because people come in with traditional marketing experience or traditional finance experience, whatever it is, and then they got to catch up on the finer points. And especially in marketing, the audience is so sensitive to certain signals or values that there aren't a lot of opportunities to screw up and figure it out afterwards. So at first it's a bit of a learning curve, but it ends up being huge for the attracting talent in our industry in the long run.
So you said earlier, and I know this to be true as well, is that there's a lot, the tools that you have for growing are a lot more limited because, you just can't go say, we need 10,000 users to download our app. That's, between $5 and $10 a user, whatever it is. Just go buy the ads and boom, we build it out. That's not really something you can do with crypto very easily. So when you have, and when you're hiring, marketing professionals and you're bringing them on your own team that, maybe aren't, crypto natives, but they come from a more traditional marketing background, have you found that they see that as a challenge, or do you think they get more frustrated that they don't have as many tools in their toolbox?
Depends on their background. If they had like a pure paid marketing background like I did when I was younger, then it would be a little head spinning because you're used to having a fashion brand that you just run ads on Instagram on, and you can test, a million different iterations of copy and creatives. And there's a whole universe within that realm of marketing. But it really forces you outside your comfort zone. It's not that paid media disappears necessarily, right? There's ad networks outside of just Google and Facebook and the obvious people, buy sell ads is one that you see relatively often. There's a few others, and you can also do, native placements within a bunch of different websites. Like you can buy native placements on Yahoo or, CNBC or TechCrunch even. But they don't necessarily come with the performance metrics or the performance history that Google or Facebook might. So someone in that scenario initially, in theory, would be a little shocked, and there's a bit of a learning curve, but you'd hope that that person would be able to dive in and come up with some new best practices for themselves.
So that'd be things like, programmatic and those kind of ad buys that you're talking about there, which are not the normal Google AdWords kind of thing, but, dedicated ad networks that are already placed on specific websites, right?
Exactly. And then there's the whole universe of app advertising, which is a whole other thing.
That's interesting. Tell me about that.
So in the same way that there are display ad networks on whatever website you're on, there are also those really annoying ads that show up in apps, like when you're playing like a puzzle game or something and you lose and then you have to watch an ad for like 15 seconds. Those kind of ad networks where they're going to get placed in games or news apps or whatever else it is. And they're not necessarily run through Google. So they might have less strict rules in order to attract people like crypto companies or other smaller industries that are not as easily accessible through Google.
So what have you found to be the most effective, tool out there for getting out to, as far as normal advertising? Would it be the app advertising? Would it be the programmatic? Which one have you found has the best, which one of those has the best audience that are receptive to the crypto messaging?
Really depends on what your objective is and what kind of marketing you're doing. So if it's brand marketing or performance, at eToro, we're lucky enough to actually be able to run ads on Facebook and Twitter and the main platforms because globally we're more widely recognized as a broker. So that's what most people know us for overseas, but in the US, we're crypto only right now. So we're able to take advantage of that relationship with those publishers. Outside of that, it's the typical stuff. When you're marketing to a niche industry like we are, it's thinking about where are these people most often. So you go to Twitter. Okay, well, you can't necessarily run ads on Twitter. You can post organically as much as you can, but what's next? So what's next is podcast advertising or YouTube advertising natively within the videos with the publishers. But there's also the influencer sponsorships. And you're seeing that get more and more popular now, whether they're through networks like what Blockworks Group is doing, or whether the brand reaches out individually to individual influencers, which is my preference and what we do. So that's one of the easiest and arguably most affordable ways to get wider reach within your niche.
So say a community project. Now, what would you say is the best thing for a community project that may not have that ICO backing, that big bankroll that we had with a lot of these projects, 2-3 years ago? It was interesting. I mean, you saw people throw money, like really big amounts of money at ridiculousness.
Yeah.
As far as marketing goes, I saw. And it seems like ROI to me has always been an important thing. I was just, curious, what would you recommend for these community projects that don't have that? How would you deal with those kind of projects instead of something that was really had a big bankroll and maybe VC funding, for example?
Sure. Well, I think that you got to think about it in some degree similar to a brand selling a product. So where is your product for sale? Okay, so we're thinking about crypto exchanges, right? So you might want to spend a lot of your time getting more familiar with the marketing and PR teams of those exchanges so that you have better co-branding opportunities and relationships with those people. You can have them add your brand and your token into more marketing materials and therefore expose the token / brand to more people that way. And, marketing is really just a game of eyeballs. At the end of the day, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, the more people see things, the more they're aware of a brand, the more opportunity there is for them to purchase or participate within the brand. So that's probably a place that I would start with first, because, when people see people shilling like non-top 10 assets now, people just assume it's some sort of, whether it's a bot network or whatever else it is. I see this in my replies all the time, but if you can integrate organically with a provider of your services, it makes it a lot easier for you.
So one of the things that I've seen, and it was interesting as someone who's US based, you're US based, is that crypto is like a global thing from day one, you know, and so the exchanges are global, the projects are global, the the bases for many of these projects are global in nature. Um, how do you deal with that as a project? Like, for instance, marketing, you know, a lot of times, you know, a US based industry might be just mostly focused on that, you know, the US, for instance. But how do you deal with the globalness and the messaging globally for any kind of crypto project?
This is a challenge that I think most crypto companies discovered really early on. And when you look at, when we keep going to 2017, 2018, but it really was a craze. You know, people are not, for people that are relatively new in this space, it's not that people are playing up what it was like during the boom. It was as exaggerated as it sounds that people talk about it. So there were all these projects that, you know, started out US based or started out UK based, and then suddenly they had to hire like a community team in multiple regions of Asia because suddenly that catches on in one of their exchanges over there. And then all of a sudden, maybe a market dries up and they have to ditch those and only really focus on two regions. I recently had a call with someone who's a part of a fairly large DeFi project. And they were saying that over the last year, they've cut teams in certain regions of the world, and they're really just focusing in the US and a couple other places right now because that's where their customers are at the moment. And really, that's what it comes down to. It's where the majority of your users, in the case of a token project, where's the majority of your volume, and what can you do with those people to increase the brand awareness or your volume, if that's what your KPI, your goal is there.
Yeah, it's been interesting as a project, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm not here to shell Tusk all day, even though I love Tusk. But
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because it's really, we're US based. We're not an ICO. We're not illegal security. So we're one of probably a couple dozen projects that eventually be able to legally be traded on US exchanges. The problem is it's really hard to get on a US exchange. So most of the exchanges we're on, at least right now, are in Asia. I mean, it just seems
Mm-hmm.
like where the most of them are right now. But it's interesting having to go through and negotiate with all these different and it's different by which country in Asia too. They're the way they interact, the way
Mm-hmm.
they negotiate, or in some cases don't negotiate. And it's been interesting kind of trying to navigate that. Like, I mean, I got a background in business. I got an MBA for whatever that's worth these days, but you know, but it's like international business 101 day one with
Yeah.
crypto. And it's like I got to go read a book on, you know, negotiating in Asia, and because I've just never had to do that before. So it's been pretty fascinating, and it's actually been really fun too, though, because I've met some amazing people around the world through my project. And so I think that's what I really like about doing this. But it's also sometimes really frustrating, is, you know, not understanding some of the, you know, just the more cultural nuances, just because there's so many you have to be worried of something. In, you know, it's interesting because as a typical American, right, you just kind of think all Asians are the same. Well, they're not. They're very, very culturally very different from one another. And so a long time ago, I used to work for a Japanese company, and back when I was a corporate guy 20 years ago. And you know, I get how the Japanese work because I worked for a Japanese company. I worked around a lot of Japanese people, but they think and act and do business very differently than, say, people in China do. It's just totally night and day. And to me, that's been very fascinating. But is for you guys, even like with eToro, are you essentially then hiring different marketing people or ground teams in each country that you think you're going to have a big presence in?
So basically the way it works with us is that we have regional offices. So for example, I work in the US office, I run the US marketing team, but there's a completely different marketing team in the UK for, we have one region that's most of Europe that there's one team working on. There is a team in China that only works on China, etc. So we're a little bit luckier because we're at the scale now where we can have all these regional teams. But it's not that easy for everyone else. So it's kind of a little bit about prioritization based on business goals.
So do you guys all coordinate though, all the different marketing teams around the world, just so you still have a similar message, or you're at least staying on a consistent, focus when you're doing the marketing? Or and is it then just regionalized? Like, is there one central brand messaging and then it's just, regionalized in a certain way that makes more sense for those places?
Yeah, kind of. So basically, there's like a central brand to eToro that's managed globally, or at HQ, we just call it globally. There's like a brand book basically with the way we like to talk about things, the colors we use, the gradient styles that we do in our graphics and things like that. But every region's a little bit different, right? So the copy is going to differ. The way that the UK talks about crypto would be different than we do. There are things that we're allowed to do that they're not allowed to do. For example, we like to throw incentives to customers to have them come in, but in the UK, they're not allowed to do that legally. So there's a lot of differences, and they really leave it up to us to make it our own, which is a really fun part of the job.
In your experience, at least, coming from the more traditional side of marketing to the crypto, what would you see? What are some of the horror stories that you've seen out there in the marketing of crypto?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to how there was a lot of like amateurism at the beginning, and it wasn't like purposeful negligence or anything like that. It was that most of the personalities were just people, right? They had never taken a sponsorship before. They had never done any of these things. So sometimes you'd like sign a deal with someone for 6 months, and then 2 weeks later, they're like, sorry, I decided I don't want to do this with you anymore. I signed with your competition. So stuff like that is really annoying, but it happens from time to time. And, you're not going to burn a bridge. So it's whatever it is. Other times it's, if you think back, you can probably think of at least a couple companies that partnered with a project that ended up being a scam of some sort, right? Like whether it's listing a token or whatever it is. So I think that a lot of the differences between then and now is just maturity and growing into like a respectable industry.
So what would you say your best advice would be to a new company, say a VC-backed project? What would be the best piece of advice you could give them in the beginning?
Invest in your brand and your brand's voice. So that applies to social media, the way you talk about things, the way you present the values of the company. Because at the end of the day, the way that our community works is that if you don't follow the simple rules of the basic tenets of decentralized currencies and whatever way you want to interpret those things, digital currencies, you're really never going to take off, right? Because you're not going to be able to capture the attention of the influencers who might share your content and bring more attention to your brand. It's a lot more of an uphill battle. You don't need necessarily to invest in a paid media team or a paid media agency, which is kind of backwards to a lot of people's experiences. So having a strong brand team, which includes a strong UX asset on board, and then making a product that's easy to use. I think we're finally approaching the days of no longer having to deal with apps or dApps or platforms that you need to read like a manual for. Because for a time, there were a lot of exchanges where you kind of had to read steps on a form or whatever to complete a purchase or a trade. And thankfully, those days are now appear to be behind us.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, right?
So, Brad, where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brad Michelson.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today. And anytime you got something interesting you want to talk about, you're more than welcome to come back.
Sounds great. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you. I am Rob McNeely. This is the Rob McNeely Program. Check us out on the web at robmcneely.com, and we will catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the Rob McNeely Program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcneely.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.